It's time for the Cybersecurity News Byte with Jim Guckin.
Cybersecurity News Byte, episode number 42 for January 23rd, 2023. New CrySIS Dharma ransomware variants. No fly list uncovered. Riot games hacked. And MailChimp discloses a new breach. All this and more on this week's episode. Hello and welcome back to the show. We start off this week talking about the new CrySIS, CrySIS, and Dharma ransomware variants. Now, to understand this story, you actually got to go a little bit back in time. Back to the good old days of February 2016, where ESET researchers found a new ransomware, and they called it CrySIS. They mostly spotted this in like Russia, Japan, North and South Korea, and Brazil. So very targeted kind of ransomware. Well, just a few months later, in November of 2016, someone had leaked the decryption keys for this ransomware. In fact, it was on Bleeping Computer's forum. They gave a file that actually contained the master decryption keys and information on how to actually use them. And a lot of people suspected this might be a member of CrySIS's development team. And if you had version 2 or version 3 of the CrySIS ransomware, where you were able to, decrypt your stuff. You probably already paid or erased it at that time, but hey, a win's a win. Now, January 2017 comes around, almost a year later from when it started. And CrySIS Ransomware as a Service was launched as a new name called Dharma. DHARMA. Now, in March of 2017, the master key was released once again on Bleeping Computers forums. And through that time, there was a lot of work being done on this ransomware. And then in 2019, there was a new one launched called Phobos, which was really similar in design to Dharma. I mean, really, like it was pretty much the same code. Now, that leaked code out there is being used by several different attackers out there who are just kind of creating variants of this CrySIS or Dharma ransomware that's out there. Now, it seems they're all kind of using the same kind of tactics. So their main attack is try to get access to exposed RDP servers. There also have been things where they are phishing people and they try to pretend like they're installing real software, usually antivirus. Who would have guessed? And the cool thing is kind of once they have encrypted your data, the ransomware actually executes an HTML application. It's Microsoft's HTML application, so it's MSHTA, to display an HTA file called info.hta, which contains all of the details on the ransom, how to get a hold of them, how to pay them, etc. Now, it also drops a separate info.txt, for us who like the text files, that includes a shortened set of instructions to reach the attacker. If you don't really feel like reading through the long one, they give you a nice shorter ones different. Now, we've kind of told you what the similar tactics in all these different techniques are, but what's different? Well, for one, it sets the language of the console to code page 1251, which gives it the ability to use Cyrillic languages, non-English language. It deletes your shadow copies. Obviously, a lot of ransomware does that because then you can't restore it from a backup easily. The ransomware actually copies itself and adds it into the startup folder of your computer. So when you reboot, make sure it's running. The one big difference is too that the file extensions for this particular ransomware are different depending on your variety of attacker. Everyone wants to use their own extension at the end of it. So there are a lot of things similar, but there are a lot of things that they've changed over time to kind of really solidify the attack. And as I always state, and I will state multiple times throughout the show, because I this is going to be a theme here, which is phishing attacks. A lot of people think that hacking is done by someone breaking into systems, and that happens. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. But the vast majority of hacks that you're seeing nowadays come in through phishing campaigns, where they get people to click on links or put their username and password in or do whatever they have to do to gain access to the system. And some of them are good. I mean, I've seen some good ones where, if I didn't know better, I wouldn't have known it was phishing. So it's kind of one of those things where you have to be on the lookout. You have to know what you're looking for, and you have to train your employees to spot suspicious things. Not just suspicious URLs or an email address they don't trust, because we've talked about it on the show before. They use OneDrive, they use Box, they use SharePoint to make these links that come genuinely from Microsoft. So you can't say it's a bad bad address. It's not a bad URL to the website because it goes to SharePoint. But we have to kind of change the mindset in how we train our users, in which to be suspicious of things that you're not expecting, or to pick up the phone call and just call the person who's sending the file, like, hey, did you send this to me? Sometimes easier than others. I understand that, but it'll be easier. Because I have seen where people try to email so they don't have to call people, and the hacker responds back, yeah, it's me, it's fine, absolutely, go ahead and do that. So we have to kind of train people how to be smarter when it comes to this stuff, because stuff like this, when code gets leaked, they're just going to run rampant with variants, and your signature-based antivirus, malware, anything along those lines is signature-based. But when they change it enough, it's not going to see it in the signature, so it'll get through. So just something you have to kind of be on the lookout for. But definitely the thing here is make sure that you are monitoring your system. You're using some kind of action-based, malware detection, not just signature-based. Though you should use signature-based, just in conjunction with behavior-based. And make sure your users feel empowered to tell you when they think an email does not look right. I always tell people I would rather see 100 emails that were spam or junk than someone to click on one and then, end up with this kind of mess on their hands. Now, I can't believe I get to talk about this story today, because it's something you don't think you have to talk about, because I never thought it would be there. And what I'm talking about is the no-fly list. That list that keeps terrorists off of airplanes. And I want to say that it's, from my understanding, it is a classified list because of all the alphabet agencies out there that have access to this. So it's a very closely guarded kind of secret. Well, that is, unless you're Swiss hacker and hacktivist Maya Arsen-Cremu, I believe I'm saying it right, hopefully I'm saying it right, who is using Shodan, which is a tool used by security people to find vulnerabilities. It pretty much is like a map for vulnerabilities, or a Google for vulnerabilities. You kind of tell it what you want, and it can kind of show you stuff. Well, while playing along with it, they found an unsecured server that belonged to the airline of Commute Air. And on that unsecured server, they found a file called nofly.csv. The list had about 1.5 million entries in total. That doesn't mean 1.5 million people, but aliases are in there. So, if I'm James Guckin, I'm Jim Guckin, I'm Jimmy Guckin, whatever, those different variations are, it's in there. So it can tag off of that, as well as birth dates for the people on the no-fly list, which makes sense because you have to check for a birthday. According to Cremu, it contained identities of hundreds of thousands of individuals from the U.S. government's terror screening database and the quote-unquote no-fly list. It had private information on almost 1,000 Commute Air employees, which held passport numbers, addresses, phone numbers, user credentials for about 40 Amazon S3 buckets, and servers that are run by Commute Air. So, not a really good mix of things to find on this thing. Now, the TSA has made a quote saying, hey, look, we're aware of potential cybersecurity incident with Commute Air, and we are investigating in coordination with our federal partners. Now, Commute Air, who is a regional airline based out of Ohio, so it may not be one that you're familiar with. It wasn't one I was familiar with. They said, well, the exposed server was really just our development server and was used for testing purposes. Which is not really a good excuse for cybersecurity people. Like, I don't care if it's a development server, where it shouldn't have this kind of live sensitive. And we talked about this on the show. I am a firm believer of your development environment should have realistic data, maybe data that existed in your production, which was anonymized or scrubbed and then put into your fake development thing so that you can kind of get some results that you're looking for. But putting production data in development is a bad idea. And here's exactly why. Because the server was just sitting there on the internet unsecured. This person didn't have to really do quote-unquote hacking. They just found it and was able to connect through it. Now, I will say that this development server used for testing purposes was taken offline as soon as people started telling them that this was a vulnerability. They confirmed the legitimacy of the data that was given to them by journalists. So they're saying, yeah, this data is real. Now, they said that the no-fly list is actually an older one from about 4 years ago. So we're talking 2019-ish. Still, something to be kind of concerned about. Their exact quote was, the server contained data from a 2019 version of the federal no-fly list that included first and last names and dates of birth. In addition, certain Commute Air employees and flight information were accessible. We have submitted notification to the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, CISA, and we are continuing with a full investigation. So, if it's a development server, all right, I just want to say, it's a development server and you had your no-fly list and you're testing no-fly, I'm not comfortable with that, but I can kind of understand it. When you have employee data, real data, dates of birth, names, flight information, that's getting a little hard for me to even justify being a real reason why someone would have this data on this server. And once again, this is why it's so important to understand your environment, to constantly be checking on your environment, and to have security boundaries in place so that people who bring up servers. So let's say this was a development server. In most normal environments, that development environment has no access directly to the internet. Nothing can connect in. Nothing should connect into a development environment unless it's internal network only. Because really, more than likely, your developers are usually internal unless you have some developers from the other side of the world, which honestly they should be VPNing into your primary network anyway, and then making the connection to the development network. My guess is probably something similar here. They probably had some out-of-country engineers or developers working on their software, and so they needed the data to test and verify that it worked exactly the way they wanted it to, so they opened this to the internet so people could check in on it. But you really have to spend time and understand where your egress and ingress points are on your network. You have to know those so that you can make sure they are secured in the way that is possible. And the reason I mention this is because, you could have, if you have a big company, or if you're a subsidiary of a company, someone goes, hey, we'll just throw a Comcast line in here, or your choice of cable provider, depending on where you live. And then they plug that into a computer, and then, with a second network card, I can still connect to our corporate network. And now you have a way of getting in and out of your network that is not monitored the same way. And when someone comes in, and they will, because anyone can tell you, the second you put anything on the internet, within minutes people are scanning against what ports they can find open. They're going to find it, and they're going to start knocking to get in. Now, you may not get hit right away. You may just have some people who are unskilled trying against it, but eventually someone's going to find their way in, someone who's a little more clever than the rest, and then that's when the problem starts. So you really want to make sure all of your systems, the only communication in are the ones that you approve and you monitor, and that you can block traffic that you don't want there. I mean, I always recommend where you can that you geo-block IP addresses. Like, hey, if this is our overseas developers, then they can access their development environment from the outside, which once again I'm not happy with, but we can talk about it through it. But the only people who can access that data are from these geo-locked IPs. And it's not perfect. Don't get me wrong, it's not perfect. Someone can VPN in, someone can use Tor, they can get in to make it look like they're from. But they have to figure out which ones you're allowing at that point, which sets the bar a little higher than your average person who's going to sit there and do it, unless they really want that data, which means they really have to know who you are and what your business is. But as I said, I recommend nothing from development, nothing from testing. Only production stuff should have a single point out to your internet, or however you want to do it over the many IPs you have, and that traffic be monitored, and that traffic be set in a proper security stance, whether it's blocking ports, whether it's letting stuff in, whether it's changing one port to another, however you want to do that, but make sure there's a security thing around anything coming into your network, or you might end up like this small regional airline who now has to deal with a pretty big loss of data that the US government would rather people not know who's on it. I mean, there's been lawsuits trying to get an idea of who's on the no-fly list, so this isn't helping, even if it is old. And it's also not the first time a no-fly list has been found. And they compared this current no-fly list to that one, retroactively saying, yeah, this appears legit. So just make sure things are secure so you don't lose sensitive data, especially if you have a no-fly list. Now, our third story for this week is a shorter story than most that we do, only because it's still unfolding. And this happens to do with Riot Games. If you're not a gamer or not familiar with it, Riot Games is a video game developer / publisher. So they can develop games and they can publish them. They are most famously known for two games, League of Legends and Valorant. I've heard of both. I have not played either one. But apparently, they had a compromise, and that's delaying some game patches that they promised were out there, which, as a gamer, I'm sure people are very upset with. I can understand if there were some things that you needed fixed that are not going to get fixed or delayed getting fixed. But as a security person, because this was their development environment, where they developed the games, they're being a little cautious. And I understand that because, look, the last thing you want, if I was Riot Games CISO, would be to okay this, push out patches that may have some kind of malware, embedded in them. And I'm not saying it's ransomware where it's going to lock machines or something, like just something to be able to steal data. So to be a little cautious and have people comb through the code through the updates to verify that it does what it says it should do, I think is a very prudent, stance to take. And it's probably not popular amongst the fans. I'm sure there's some fans who understand that maybe some improvements are not going to come for another few weeks, why they kind of sort this entire mess out. And the reason I said this is still ongoing was, one, I will give them an A+ for communication. They hopped on Twitter on Friday night and pretty much said, hey, look, our development environment was compromised. In fact, they actually said, earlier this week, systems in our development environment were compromised via a social engineering attack. Now, this is why at the beginning of the show I said, look, social engineering is the way, a lot of these breaches happen. So somehow they compromised someone's accounts via social engineering attack, and got access to this developer environment. Now, as I said, we don't have all the information now. Riot Games is kind of saying, hey, look, these patches that were supposed to be published, we're going to miss that date. and we're going to push it back a little bit. We have to make sure everything's secure. I'm sure they're hiring a third party to come in and audit their systems. They have to re-dig through their code. And luckily, like, no information that they're aware of at this time was stolen. Which, I don't think there'd ever be personal information in their kind of development environment. It's more like, hey, could code be stolen? Which gives people the, not the idea just to sell the game, but understand how the code works. Gives people the ideas on how to cheat the game when it comes out. So, this could still be somewhat dangerous for them. But, as I said, I think they're probably more worried about what people sneak into the code than versus what they get out of it. They can always patch any hole later that, the bad party might have found. They can always go back in and change that code. That's not a problem. Their fear, my guess, is the injection of code that should not be there. Will it really impact consoles? Probably not. It would probably then really, though, affect people who game on Windows machines, which is really a large chunk of the gaming population happens to be on Windows machines. So to sneak code into there, which executes when you run the game, and if no one found it, yeah, that would be a big problem for them. And then if they started getting their customers' computers hacked through this, it would be really bad. So take the time, make sure everything's fine, have a third-party audit come in and just verify what you think happened. I mean, we may or may not find that out. But you have to understand, companies, it happens. I don't want to be that way, but it does. Everyone gets hacked eventually, if you're a big enough target. And the way that's most important is how you communicate what happened. And to come right out and say, hey, look, we had a problem. We're dealing with it. We had a social engineering attack against us that was successful. But we're making sure everything's fine. We have to take these precautions. I think is a great way to kind of communicate from your business side what happened. In a lot of discussions I've had about vendors or products that you use being hacked, what is the line you draw in the sand for moving to a different provider? And that's not a question I can give you a solid answer. It all depends on what your risk tolerance is, what you think happened, along those lines. I've been speaking a lot about that with the recent LastPass vulnerability that's been out there. Or not vulnerability, but the hack they had. And a lot of people are saying, hey, well, I'm getting off LastPass now. And the first couple times I was telling people, like, look, it happened once. Everyone gets hacked. You're just as likely to be hacked on another one. And then it was a series of bad mistakes and bad communication on LastPass's part. Well, here's another one that kind of falls into that same gray area where I want to be like, all right, how much is too much? So MailChimp has reported that they had a social engineering attack that was successful. Once again, part of the stories for this week. And they got access to a support tool and had access to 133 accounts. And this social engineering attack, this phishing attack, was not just aimed at employees, but contractors of it as well. And they first made their detection on January 11th. They detected that some unauthorized person was accessing their support tools. They verified that no credit card or password information was compromised. And within 24 hours, they cut the access and notified all of the primary contacts for the affected accounts. So, I mean, as far as response so far, really great. That they took action fast, and they went out within 24 hours and emailed, which a lot of companies, I will give them that, cannot make a turnaround on a discussion that quickly. Sometimes you just got to get yourself together and really understand what happened. So either they had really great logs and a really great tech team who can say, hey, look, here's what happened, and we're positive on this, or they just rushing something out and say, hey, something happened, you were impacted, just letting you know. Now, one of the people who were impacted by this most recent attack actually came out and was like, hey, yeah, we were impacted. And that is WooCommerce, which is an e-commerce plugin for WordPress. It's extremely popular. And WooCommerce pretty much, once they were notified, emailed their customers warning them that MailChimp exposed their names, their store, their URL, their addresses, and email addresses that are all in their lists. So, in this case, it's not just one company. It kind of goes down the line. Now, as I said, this is one of those ones where it's hard because this is not the first time that MailChimp had a compromise of their systems. In fact, back in April of 2022, Trezor hardware wallet owners got an email that was talking about a fake breach of the data, and they wanted people to download the fake Trezor suite to protect their data, which really was trying to steal their recovery seeds for their wallets. Once again, that was based off of a compromised mail list used by MailChimp that was stolen. And employees on that one fell for a social engineering attack that allowed actors to access 319 MailChimp accounts and export data from 102 of them. But that's not all, because in August of 2022, they were hit again with another phishing email from Okta. Pretending to be Okta. And that threat actor was successful. They gained access to 214 MailChimp accounts. These were very targeted because they were focused on the cryptocurrency-related customers, which included Edge Wallet, Cointelegraph, NFT creators, Ethereum FESP, Messerari, and Decrypt. So they were really targeting specific information. But now, as I said, I've read this over to you. You've had April 2022, you have August 2022, and now you have January 2023. So within a year, they have been hacked 3 times with the same exact cause. It was all a phishing email that gained access to their support tools. And I would want to say at this point, hopefully someone at that company is doing something to segment the account between their user account that they log in and check their email with, and the account that they are using to access their support tools. I mean, even if it's another set of username and passwords that you use to make sure that if your main account gets compromised, they can't really easily access the support tools, which I'm guessing from the way the attacks are, the support tools are also available online. They're probably a web-based application, so that once you get the credentials, you can kind of really hop over to do it. And web-based is the way, but that is one of the downsides of having everything on the web. If it's accessible by anywhere in the web, then people are going to try to take advantage of that. And as I said, it's not said here, but I have that feeling because I see it a lot. And that's the danger of this. But as I said at the beginning of the show, this goes to show you that phishing is dangerous. Because, was it 3 out of our 4 stories today? Phishing was the main way they were able to compromise systems. And it's not something that should be boring. Phishing training should not be boring. And you should give people what to look out for. But as I said, those techniques change. They may not always be bad spelled emails or coming from someone from outside your company. I've seen a lot of good internal ones or ones where customers, where, the ones who got compromised were able to use it for another company because they're a trusted email source. And, it's a very dangerous and kind of a way that you have to train people not only to be suspicious of every piece of email that comes in their box, but give them the correct understanding. It's not, looking for a phishing email is not a complex thing, but it does take time to explain to people. You can say hover over the links, but not all links are really suspicious, or they may look so close to it that someone may not notice. And I've seen that on a couple different domain squatted domains out there. So it's something that you just have to be cognizant of, something you have to go over with your users, and something you have to keep up on as hackers change their tactics. Because phishing is the primary way people get into networks, and they use it because it's effective and it's very low cost of entry for the hacker to get into it. So just be careful and take your time to train your users properly. Well, thanks again for listening to the show. Don't forget, you can check out more information, including show notes for today's show, on cybersecurity.newsbyte.com. If you want to reach out to me, you can always get a hold of me, me@jimguckin.com. Check me out on all my socials. They're listed on both pages. If you want to know more about me, you can always go to my website, jimguckin.com. Thanks once again for listening, and stay safe online.
You've been listening to the Cybersecurity News Byte with Jim Guckin. Learn more about our show at cybersecurity.newsbyte.com.